Okay, so I'm going to do something a little bit different now, and I'm going to talk you through some possibilities for a creative writing piece. And what we're going to talk about is we're going to start by looking at the idea of starting with a character. Now, I don't really want to get into creating an appealing character, although it's really important that your character is somebody that your reader responds to on some sort of an emotional level. If you can write a creative piece where you make your reader feel something, you're onto a winner. But what we're really talking about here is a character arc. And if you imagine like a narrative arc of a story, there is a character arc, and your character needs to want something, be frustrated, learn something important, and then get what they want. Or sometimes they get what they deserve, which is a bit different from what they want if your character was perhaps not the nicest of people. And if you think about that narrative arc, it's quite common in most of the good stories that you will have read or seen in films. So, if you're not sure what that means, I'm going to give you a couple of examples of what a character arc could look like. So if we take a really simple one and we take the character of Little Red Riding Hood, what she wants is to give cakes to her grandma because that's what her mummy's told her to do. And what stops her getting what she wants, what stops her giving those cakes to her grandma, is the wolf. What does she learn? She learns that you don't tell strangers where your granny lives. And what happens in the end depends on which version of the story you read. Sometimes the woodcutter saves the day, sometimes Little Red Riding Hood gets eaten, in which case she really learns how not to trust a wolf. But if you flip that story around a minute and you think about what does the wolf want? So at the beginning of it, he wants a nice tasty little girl to eat. And what stops him getting it is that she says that she's on her way to her granny's, and so Granny knows where she is, so she's protected a little bit by the power of adults around her. The wolf does a bit of devious scheming, he runs on ahead, he eats Granny, he gets into the bed, yada yada yada. What does he learn in the end? Well, the wolf gets a fairly short shrift at the end of the story, and he learns really that woodcutters are bad news, and probably that he ought to have left the little girl alone. And what happens in the end? Yeah, some bad things involving axes. Not a nice ending for the wolf. Now, if you're struggling to invent a character, you could create a character arc, but you don't know about inventing a character. And I would suggest you steal one. Writers do it all the time. It's called intertextuality, and writers pinch people out of each other's stories. Or sometimes they just pinch a character from history. If you think about Carol Ann Duffy's poem Mrs. Midas, think about Wicked, think about Macbeth. They're all stories that have taken a character who already existed in a different tale. So choose a character who doesn't get much to say in a story, retell it from their perspective. That's exactly what Carol Ann Duffy's done with Mrs. Midas. It's exactly what they've done with Elphaba in Wicked. So your story that you pinch a character from could be a Greek myth. That's very, very popular in a lot of literature at the moment. It could be a well-loved children's story like Red Riding Hood, or it could be a character from history. And once you've got a character, you sketch out the character arc, you think about what is it they want, what stops them getting it, what they're going to learn, and tell their story. And sometimes first-person narration, where you tell it as if you are that person, works really well for this kind of thing. If you're really struggling, and that doesn't light any kind of a fire, there is another approach that I'm going to suggest, and the other approach I'm going to suggest is that we start with setting. Now, if you've time to do a bit of reading and a bit of research, I would start with the first paragraph of Edgar Allan Poe's story, The Fall of the House of Usher. There might be some tricky vocabulary, look any of it up. Now, the house that Poe describes at the beginning of this story doesn't get a glowing write-up on TripAdvisor. It's horrible, and it would be useful to make a list of all the words that make it feel gloomy, depressing, basically like the last place on earth you'd want to spend a weekend. And then steal Poe's idea. Start with a list of vocabulary, all linked to some kind of an emotion. And it's probably best if it isn't foreboding, because what Poe is doing with the beginning of his story is foreshadowing all the nasty things that happen in the House of Usher. Don't copy too closely, because you won't do it better than Poe does it. Nobody does. But other emotions you could consider, you could think about excitement, you could think about nostalgia, curiosity, regret, anger, sadness. There's lots of possibilities. And then once you've got your list of words linked to this sort of emotional response, start to think about creating a description of a building. Now, it could be any sort of a building. It could be a house, it could be a castle, a hospital, a school, an old church, a hotel, a prison, an airport, a shop. It could be absolutely any kind of a building. But write your description and absolutely soak it in those emotion words that you've been using so that we get a real feeling for how you feel about this place. Make it atmospheric. Use your senses. Describe what you see, what you hear, what you smell. And then, why are you here? Have you been here before? Are you here to meet up with somebody? Could that be an old friend, an old flame, somebody you used to be in love with, an old enemy, or an estranged family member? Is it a wedding? Is it a funeral? What's the occasion? You could be here to do something you always wanted to do, or something you've always dreaded. It could be something as simple as a driving test. And now tell the story that brings you here. Why are you in this place, outside this building, on this date? Why are you here? Who are you here to see? Why do you want to see them? And then you need to make some more decisions. Do you go in? Do you actually walk away? Do you leave it on a cliffhanger? If you walk in, what do you find? Is it what you were expecting to find, or is there a twist in the tale that we weren't expecting? The twists in the tale could be the person you've come to see could be dead. If it's an old flame, somebody you used to be in love with, you could go in and find that they're married. Or could you find that you've spent all this time tracking them down and they're not actually the right person, it's not the John Smith that you were looking for? So there's lots of possibilities, but the biggest piece of advice I would give you would be show, don't tell. Don't tell me that Macbeth has become a ruthless killer. I will understand it in my head, but it won't move me, it won't provoke any kind of an emotional response. Show me Macbeth's hired assassin skewering an innocent child, and if you don't know the story of Macbeth, it is his friend, or his former friend, Macduff's toddler, that he sends assassins to kill. And if that happens, my heart beats faster. Let your reader empathise, let your reader feel it and have it going on in their own mind and their own emotions. If you can get your reader's heart to beat faster, and you can get your reader to hold their breath and wait to see what happens, you've absolutely nailed it. Good luck.